without further ado, we're going to kick things off with our second session of the day. Again, the morning was dedicated to finance in the age of intelligence. We're now switching gears and really moving into society and governance in the age of intelligence. We're going to be focusing on things like how do regulators help shape what the next phase of technology should look like? How can we make sure that policymakers and regulators have a solid exchange with academia and with industry in order to make informed decisions on that front? And what knowledge needs to be exchanged in order to help make that happen? We're going to head into our very first panel discussion of the session, entitled Civilizations, Revolutions, and Algorithms, Governing Transformative Technologies. Joining me on stage is our main moderator for the afternoon sessions, and that is Mike Butcher, founder and editor of Pathfounders. He is joined by his panelists, Professor Ramesh Raskar, associate professor and director for the Camera Culture Group at MIT Media Lab, Dr. Tricia Wang, CEO of the Advanced AI Society, and Dr. Verena Kontschieder, co-CEO of Opendata.ch and the program lead for the Prototype Fund. Let's give our first panel of the afternoon a warm welcome.
Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Butcher. I'm a journalist, long-time journalist, previously with TechCrunch, now launching Pathfounders in the latter part of last year and getting going this year. We'll be covering startups and venture capital and AI. Now, unfortunately, my MC has stolen my thunder and introduced our panel, but neglected to just fill those bios out. Tricia Wang, to my left here, is a tech-obsessed ethnographer, obsessed with designing equity into systems. So we will be hearing from her shortly. Dr. Verena Kontschieder is a policy and technology governance expert with over a decade of experience in the intersection of emerging technologies, public policy and society, formerly of Meta at one point as well. I've already attempted to get some news out of her, but I'm not getting anywhere. Perhaps she'll mention something on stage. And next to me is Professor Ramesh Raskar, who's from MIT, and his new focus is on building world-scale interfaces between societal systems and cyber-physical systems. We'll be hearing from him shortly. Let's have a round of applause for everyone, and let's get going. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very much, I'm actually, wherever Dom is, thank you so much for putting this on, because this kind of conversation doesn't get talked about enough at a meeting like this in Davos and during WEF about what's going on. The civilizations, revolutions and algorithms is our topic. And if you look at AI through the lens of past civilizational shifts, we've come down from the trees, whatever you prefer to call it. We've had the agrarian cultural revolution. We've had the industrial revolution. We've had the electrification revolution. So what I wanted to kick off with everyone with a kind of very tricky question was, what sort of civilizational shift are we living through right now? Is it just electricity on steroids? Is it machine learning on steroids? Verena, do you want to have a go to start off?
Sure. So I really do think that we have never witnessed what we are going through right now in terms of just one civilizational change. I would say we are at the intersection of, for instance, a massive introduction of bureaucracy, which I would say is one civilizational change. Then I would probably say that we could compare it to the introduction of the printing press, and plus add to that mixture statistics. I believe that I say that because statistics is really about the modeling of societal behavior. The printing press was about making knowledge widely available. And then I would say bureaucracy is really about collecting and processing and deciding at scale about society. So I think we are in that kind of sweet spot of multiple civilizational changes at the same time.
How exciting.
Well, I love that you reference all this technology in these various periods. I think whenever you see a big technological shift, I want to actually just shift the focus a little bit and not talk about just the technology itself, which you've already covered. But every time the pattern is that when you have a big new technology come, the question that it brings up is really about who are we? Like, who are we as a humanity? And we have to work through these thorny questions of what counts as a person. And that's something I'm really interested in, because the technology is, we're using it. And the question is, how much of it is it using us, And we've seen this every time that when there's a big technology shift, you've seen in the past where it's like, really the thorny question is, what is a person? Like, what happens to our personhood? And you saw that with the printing press, and during that period, it was really coming around where the church really controlled information, and we lived in a feudal empire where we were subjects. Our personhood was very much in this kind of infrastructure where there was not a lot of class, there was no class mobility, and you were born into your lot, and that was it. And we were subjects. And then you see all this technology that's being referenced that we're talking about, where it enabled the Industrial Revolution. And what that unleashed was, a couple centuries up until now, which is what we see of capitalism. And then we really learned how to become consumers, consumers and laborers. Those were literally new identities glommed onto our personhood. We didn't know what it meant to be a laborer before. There was no such thing as wage labor. Your work was attached to what you were born into. And we didn't know what it meant to consume. Like, it's really hard to imagine what is society like if you're not consuming, because everything we have on, we're usually not making any of the stuff that we have here, right? We've consumed it in a wage labor context. And now what's happened over the last, I think few decades is that we see this new struggle of really figuring out what social media, because we didn't win the social media. We won the browser wars and the server wars, where we were able to control the stack, on some level, where we had open source win. But just going to the social media, what happened was that it really captured us and our identity, our data. And what's happened is that a really big shift where not only are we subjects, or it's like also we're consumers and laborers in this internet space, because we do all of that stuff in it, but we're also now users. And I think that's the thing that we really have to remember, that our personhood right now has been reduced to being users. We call ourselves users. We self-reference ourselves as that. There's user research. There's like user experience. Like, tech companies refer to the people as users. And then it's all about number, what's your like total value, what's like your MAU, all the stuff, all the statistics, and the rise of statistics is the way we measure our companies is based on us as users. So I really think that's the big shift that it's like now what happens in an agentic space when we can have agents potentially represent not just enterprises and companies, but us, and be extensions of us. Is this an extension of my personhood? Is this an extension of me as a consumer, as a citizen, as a subject?
Well, we are both users, and now we're all managers, because apparently we're all about to start managing AI, agentic AI, and let them fly, my pretties fly. So that'll be interesting as well. Ramesh, what do you think about what's going on?
I think Tricia is making a very important point, that by calling all of us users, it's very dehumanizing.
It is.
And I think to your point, Verena, I think the trends in AI could make it even more dehumanizing. And I think it's very important to take the narrative back. I use the example of social media as opposed to the World Wide Web. So the question for all of us in this room is, will the internet of AI, the internet of AI agents, will look more like the World Wide Web, which is an open web, versus, those ecosystems that we see on Android and iOS, or Facebook and Twitter, which are, closed walled gardens. So are we going to get an open web or a closed web? And of course, we hope that the Internet of AI agents, or the agentic web, will look more like the open web. But that's not going to happen, on its own. If you map out every possible pathway of how AI and AI agents are going to evolve, I would say maybe 9 out of 10 of those pathways are going to lead to some kind of a dystopian future where, 3 or 4 large companies are controlling the ecosystem. The global south doesn't have much role to play. Democratization and decentralization remains a distant dream. Hollowing out of middle class. And if you're a kind of a Adam Smith fan, the invisible hand, we may not get the shared prosperity at all. But I think out of the 10 paths, there's one path that can probably take us there. And as Tricia said, I think we want to choose the path that doesn't dehumanize us.
I think you said something there which reminded me of a conversation I had at Web Summit a few months ago with a CEO who, backstage just after our conversation, I'm not going to mention who it was, said, actually, I'm extremely worried that the world might end up being run by 4 companies because of this shift.
It already is.
Because of 4, well, I know.
We got to 5.
But even more so, I suppose, because certainly the ability of agentic AI might end up. I mean, it could even sort of do away with Amazon, for instance.
And I think the Web3 community has shown a potential path in terms of the technology stack. The challenge is that maybe it was too much focused on technology and short returns, but I think the building blocks are there. In fact, I was in a meeting with some of the Fortune 10 players in tech, and very important meeting about the future of AI agents and what would do that. And like maybe an hour into the meeting, the key players, and you can imagine who they are, saying, what we should do is we should create this decentralized identity. And the way we should do this, we should have some kind of a public, immutable system. And after 5 minutes, I said, you realize they're reinventing Web3.
I was like,
They said, yeah, okay, all right. Those people should be in this room, guiding, the architecture of the future of the agentic web.
If I may, just to your point, like the world is being run by an oligopoly or polypoly of companies. I think, I always answer or would try to answer that by saying maybe the problem is not the technology itself, but it's where we implemented the technology into. So it's like the new wine and old wineskins issue. But that's just a small comment.
Well, we can expand on that with if we sort of move into the conversation we were going to look at in terms of sort of historical analogies. We've got the word civilizations in our session. There was a book a few years ago called the first 5,000 years of history, and argued that early tribal groups were actually quite cooperative with each other before the city-state, before I think even in early agrarian societies. And then, of course, somebody invented the sword and the bow and arrow, and we got a lot of power plays and centralization of power. So, in historical analogies, do you see any kind of misleading analogies with the AI revolution, or do you see any quite useful learnings that we can take from history?
So I think in terms of analogies that are being made, the one very misleading example is the calculator. Is it called a table calculator, like the ones we used in school? I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ramesh, but those devices
She's pointing at me because I'm the oldest. I might have used a calculator.
No, you're the one and MIT. But no, what I want to say is the calculator really is deterministic. Like it was supposed to run a repetitive task and give me a correct result. Whereas what we are witnessing in AI or AI-driven, AI-powered general purpose AI, especially LLMs, is that we are actually probabilistic. Like we are actually opening up different result zones and areas that we are not yet able to define sometimes. So I think that's a very misleading analogy. And then another one I want to mention is the invention of the car. And I think that's also a very misleading one. I mean, it's useful, but I think it's still misleading because with the car, I mean, it's clear. It was a physical problem to solve. We are going from A to B. It's not an epistemic issue, a knowledge issue, a who are we about to govern issue. Harms are very specific. Liabilities are very regulated. We have institutions. We have clearly determined risks, and we don't have that yet at that level, I would say, at least in AI. Mm-hmm. Even, we're all working on that, right? Yeah. Our panel is working on that.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, I mean, any kind of historical analogy that compares it to something that's, where it's a very defined problem set, it's inappropriate. It's just not at the same scale,
Right.
even if it's like you compare it to nuclear where the harms are well identified, but analogies are like that. People were trying to grapple with stuff, and I think and it's okay that like our analogies are imperfect. I'm just more pissed off at the doomsday scenarios that are really misleading people's energy. I think that's much more harmful, where you have people propagating that, AI is going to, you have AGI and it's going to destroy humanity.
But that was partly propagated by Sam Altman. About 2.5 years ago, when he did a world tour of governments, telling everyone they had to shut down AI development now, and then gave himself a 2-year head start.
Exactly.
Or is that a cynical thing to say?
No, it's not. I mean, we know that's what happened.
I mean, I want to go back to the automation versus autonomy, which is a very critical thing, like calculator and car. And, intelligence comes because of autonomy. Intelligence doesn't come because of automation. And so, I would say, to your point about things being probabilistic, humans are very probabilistic.
Yeah.
I raise my daughters, and once they turn 18, I just believe them. Or we train a doctor and we just let them loose, but we still trust them. Of course, we don't let them loose. We build a whole structure around it. And what's exciting about your research is you think about the societal systems. So I would love to work with you to see how AI agents will have the same values, that we think about in the general society. And I think that'll be like a whole new field, Mike. If you think about, new universities, new programs, new companies, they'll be busy, just like their HR departments, there are management consulting companies, they'll be actually doing coaching of these AI agents, to instill value, not to regulate them, but to, let them thrive. And then very quickly about the analogy, I think probably the best analogy is from the switch from the mainframe to the PC. Because, and right here in Switzerland, Tim Berners-Lee at CERN said, hey, PCs are great, but connecting them is more fun through the World Wide Web. And later on, he moved to MIT, and at MIT, he created the World Wide Web Consortium. And that really allowed us to, again, keep this, open the web of websites. And it's very important for us to realize that, in the early 80s, most people thought that computing means these big mainframe machines run by IBM and DEC and create supercomputers, and all of us are just users. But only when, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs said, oh, actually there'll be a PC on every desktop, we got the democratization. And so we should all be, really striving for the democratization. And to me, that's like the best analogy. But it was not enough to democratize the PC on every desktop. It was even more important to connect those pieces to unleash the value. And I think those are the three phases for me. So the mainframe versus PC is AI versus AI agents, and PC versus internet is AI agents to the internet of AI agents.
So if we're entering this era, then as our title suggests, talking about algorithms and governance, we've got states, we've got corporations, we've got standards bodies, we've got engineers. This, especially in terms of agentic AI, arrives on our doorstep shortly, what's going to happen on the governance side of things? I know, Tricia, you look at a lot about how focusing on what systems miss. So what are we going to miss in terms of, how this plays out?
Well, I think what we need to focus is on what these systems need in order for them to work, because the innovation is here. I'm not here to be like, let's stop it, and only let one company do it. We shouldn't do that. But at the Advanced AI Society, we believe that we have to make these autonomous systems provable. That is the only way we're going to have shared prosperity, is that we can have these systems that we can control, and that we can prove that there's control. And that proof does not come from a company or a contract that says you're legally bound. That proof has to be cryptographically tamper-proof solutions. And that's what this whole entire field of Web3, blockchain, cryptography, cryptocurrency, this whole community has been working on. It's what Ramesh was talking about. It's like we have the technology, but we haven't figured out how to talk to the rest of the world about it, of why they need proof. But the agents will force this agentic technology, because you're going to have agents that need to be autonomous, and we also need to give them autonomy. And so then you're going to want to have, for the first time, provable control. And you want to have provable control over privacy, over portability, that you can leave. It's a composability. You can leave systems in and out. You can have multi-vendor, multi-cloud systems. We're going to have proof of control over verifiability. How do I verify if this work was done? And how do you have proof of control over security and identity? And these are all the things that I like the analogy that Ramesh used of like raising kids, because you also need to do that when you're raising a kid. Dakai has written a book about raising AI as children, is that trust is earned through these proofs. But now this technology allows us to do that. But the governance has to work in that we have to, those who have the technology, the proof of control builders, need to work with the enterprise buyers and the hyperscalers. And we need to have the standard bodies there. We need to have the nation states there who want the sovereign AI, and to say all of these things, let's agree to some underlying plumbing, maybe we can fight it out over the marketplace. But this is totally possible to have control over your stack. It's just people don't know it.
Well, Verena, this is a good moment to bring you in, because in terms of governance, you've looked at this a lot, haven't you? And but my impression is that people building foundational models, that the people who would like to, for instance, do verifiable proof, perhaps cryptographic verifiable proof, are not allowed in the room and not being brought into the room at the moment. And so what do we do about that?
Well, I think that we have a different issue rather than that co-creational or inclusion issue. I think it goes back to what we were talking briefly about before. I think what we do is we define a user of a system, of an agentic system, of whatever other AI-driven or AI-powered system or data-driven system as a user. And as that in the user categorization, we see a digital user. We don't see the whole bulk of lived experience that comes with it. So the human rights, the right to be forgotten, for instance, misinformation, education, like all those elements that make us a nuanced human being and make us humans. And I think that's the actual issue that at least I have faced. And I also did face another issue, which was also in the tech industry and in a position in the tech industry, where we did bring in, at OpenLoop, for instance, model builders. Like OpenLoop is a project that was supposed to build up product governance, healthy product governance together with policy governance. So both the private sector product development side plus the regulatory side. And what we saw in there is that the incentives were just not aligned, meaning the models were built and thought so that they could actually take into consideration inclusion, which was like one of the main issues that we looked at. But once the models were let out there onto the real system, the models took on a life of their own, and the incentives were made so that the builders would focus on building new models rather than monitorize the models once out in the real space. So that's why I would say we should probably also work rather towards prototyping, pilots, use cases, experimentation to really witness what happens.
I actually think the incentives are here now for the first time, because in order to actually get your agents to work outside of your own cloud, you are going to be demanded to show that you have proof that there's not a security risk and that they've done what, that's actually they're interacting safely. And so I think the incentives are there for the first time. And second, there's a quick answer of why are proof of builders not being invited in the room and not at the table? Because they don't know how to talk about what they do, which is why we needed to create an industry association. You go to any Web3, cryptography, blockchain conference, and can anyone understand what's going on if you're not deep in this world and everyone's fighting out about which protocol and which layer? It's because we have not used language that really speaks to who is the buyer, who's the retail consumer, who's the enterprise buyer, and really understanding what a boring SaaS software sales cycle looks like. We don't actually understand how to sell our services in Web3. And I come from the enterprise and I come from Web3 also, so I can bridge this. But most people, if they're like, they hear like, oh, you're from enterprise, they're like, oh, you sold out to the centralists. And it's like, no, this stuff augments the current centralized stack. And so that's why they're not in the room, because I think historically Web3 has been quite honestly disparaging of anyone who does not do a pure decentralization model. And I think that's why, my co-panelists here are not like that, which is so exciting. And this is why I'm excited for us to be talking about that.
We go back and forth because, I think, a lot of people in Web3 things like Web3, AI needs Web3. And in reality, Web3 needs AI.
It does too.
And if you look at companies like Together AI or Prime Intellect, good example, used to be Web3 companies. They abandoned that and moved to a more centralized model, and they're doing really well. So, which is kind of a lost opportunity to your point, Tricia. I wish they would keep the Web3 philosophy of decentralization and still be able to make billions of dollars.
You mean keep the tech?
Keep the tech and keep the philosophy, the ethos.
Yeah, the ethos. It is possible.
Right.
Many companies are doing it.
Do you think that approach will start to come back because people will start to get concerned about the massive amount of centralization going on?
But I think you're repeating Tricia's point, which is this language doesn't help.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, this language
Exactly.
doesn't help.
Right.
Who's a fan of blockchain here? Who's a fan of DAO? Who's a fan of level 1, level 2? Don't talk about it.
Yeah. That's our recommendation also. If you want to go to enterprise, don't sell them something that's going to make them scared, right?
Exactly. Thank you, Tricia. You almost have to go from the opposite direction and talk about, what are the biggest opportunities if you can democratize. I don't even use the word decentralized. If you can democratize AI, this is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. And we should thank Tim Berners-Lee as much as we thank Vitalik or anybody else, right? And so I think it's important to kind of also choose our heroes and both sides and kind of celebrate them. So if I again think of Tim Berners-Lee, he's one of the earliest leaders in decentralization. In fact, he was against ICANN, which is the agency that provides DNS domain names and IP addresses. And it still happened. It's good for the world. But I think it's very critical to kind of come from the opposite direction and say, what would the world look like when everybody has an AI agent? And if you work backwards, what problems do we need to solve? So the project that we're working on at MIT, Project Nanda, NANDA, very cleverly stands for Network AI Agents in Decentralized Architecture, but we never use the word decentralized. We just say Project Nanda, right? And it satisfies the people who are like me and geeks like you, who like blockchain and decentralized technologies. But most of the audience is actually the rest of the world. So when we talk to the governments, when we talk to the boring SaaS companies, and so on, the co-creation is very critical. So I think this is a moment to. I'm so excited that some of the underlying technologies that we have seen in Web3 are going to play a big role.
Where are we at the moment in the sort of evolution of everything? Do you feel that we're really right at the beginning of this conversation? If we don't get this right, then all hell's going to break loose? Or do you think that that the conversations that need to be happening are happening, especially around governance, especially around the agentic AI and decentralization, or whatever you want to call it? Or do you think that the future is hurtling towards us at a great net rate of knots, and frankly, we don't have any control over it?
Yeah.
Verena.
Well, kind of a rough question because I think that we do have all the instruments at our disposal to make good decisions for society. I think sometimes we just plain don't do it. And I think that all of that goes into power. Like, I give an example. The UAI Act, given we're talking about regulation, right, and governance as well. In the UAI Act, you have a provision about prohibited AI practices that talks about emotional inference in settings like education or in workspaces. And actually, they are prohibited. But they are not as long as you do that or run that emotional inference for safety and medical reasons. And I think that's really what I mean. I think I wonder what was the political intent and the political will behind that particular provision. Is it really meant to protect the greater good, the public good, society? What is it made to advance? Is it made to advance the technology itself, or promote certain rights? And I think that's
it's so interesting, isn't it, that we're living through an era when you've got a president of the US who's quite obviously using crypto in many ways, shall we say, has very crypto-friendly technology advisors, people thinking of people like David Sachs, etc., and they've done podcasts here, and at the same time is regulating or rather deregulating the AI space. But the question is, are these people all talking to each other, especially in North America right now? What do you think?
How many people here are from a Fortune 10 company? It's okay, we won't bite you. So I think that the point is the conversation's happening in very siloed domains.
Right.
right? And there is this natural tension of incumbents to keep things centralized. That doesn't mean Fortune, and I was part of those companies. I have built those companies. I have a very good relationship. It doesn't mean somebody at those companies wakes up in the morning and say, let me try to figure out how to not respect human rights. That's not the problem. The problem is, how do these amazing technologies come together? How these amazing ideas that we heard from Verena and Tricia actually come together? And forums like these are a good start, but we are still a long way to go. And I would say very briefly that the next 18 months are actually very critical, Mike.
Right.
The next 6 months are all about protocol wars and partnership wars.
Okay.
The 6 months after that is about any company that has more than 100 million users in the agentic world is going to use their network effect to build walled gardens. And then 6 months after that, it's a complete innovation lock, because you have system dependencies. You must use a particular model or a particular cloud or a particular tooling. So we have 18 months to a complete lock on innovation.
Okay, we're literally in the final minute or so of this. Any final thoughts?
Well, I would say I totally disagree with what you said, that conversations are in silos, partially because of the work we're doing at the Advanced AI Society. But I totally agree with you that we only have about 18 to 24 months to figure this out. And you mentioned the USA House, where Trump is and David Sachs is. We have a panel there right now where we're bringing these parties together who don't usually like to talk to each other. I'm not at that panel because I'm here. I chose to be here at the Web3 House. But, my co-founder, Michael Casey, is moderating a panel with our new member, Edge and Node, and they have the first front-end UX, dashboard for a world where you're going to have hundreds of agents, not just a world where each of us has one agent. We're all going to have hundreds managing for us. And then we have Cloudflare on the same panel that has built this thing called WebBot off of crypto, cryptography. So I think these conversations are actually starting to happen in a way that's never happened before, partially because we're learning to not lead with the technology, not say decentralized and crypto, but lead with what we all want, which is control.
Verena, do we have 18 months or longer?
No, I think I would agree. It's pressing.
We all agree on that.
We should do something now.
Right. Well, there you go. Call to action, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Tricia Wang from Advanced AI Society, Dr. Verena Kontschieder from Opendata Foundation, and Professor Ramesh Raskar from MIT. Thank you so much. I'll be back.
Yeah.
Thank you.